The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that made the world feel still, like nothing bad could ever happen. The streetlights cast a soft glow on the sidewalk, flickering slightly in the warm summer air. Jamal Lewis walked down the narrow pavement, his loyal dog, Shadow, trotting happily beside him. A black Labrador mix, Shadow had been with him since he was a kid, his best friend, his protector. The only thing in this world that never betrayed him. They had done this walk 1,000 times before. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was home. Families sitting on their porches, kids playing basketball in the distance, the occasional car rolling by. Nothing seemed out of place. And then, bang! The gunshot ripped through the silence so loud it shook Jamal's bones. For a split second, everything froze. The night, the air, the streetlights, it all just stopped. Then came the sound that would haunt him forever. A sharp, gut-wrenching yelp. Jamal turned, his eyes wide, his heart pounding. Shadow's body jerked violently, his legs giving out beneath him. His deep brown eyes, once so full of life, now glazed over with pain. Blood! So much blood! It spread across the sidewalk, dark and glistening, under the streetlights. Shadow tried to move, his paws twitching, as if begging for help. But Jamal knew. He knew. A deep scream ripped from his chest, raw and broken. No! No! Shadow! Jamal dropped to his knees, grabbing at his dog, his hands instantly soaked in warm, sticky blood. He could feel Shadow's heartbeat fading, weak, uneven, slipping away. Jamal's breath came in shallow gasps, his mind struggling to process what just happened. 1 second they were walking. The next, his best friend was dying in his arms. Footsteps. Jamal looked up, his vision blurred with rage and grief. 2 uniformed cops stood there, casually holstering their guns, like they had just taken out a wild animal. One of them, a tall white officer with a buzz cut, let out a low chuckle. Damn, guess he shouldn't have been running loose. Jamal's entire body stiffened. Running loose? Shadow was right beside him, leashed, controlled, harmless. These bastards just wanted to shoot something. Jamal's hands curled into fists, his nails digging into his palms. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be real. Another officer, a shorter one with cruel eyes, stepped forward, shaking his head like he actually found the situation amusing. Relax, man. It was just a dog. Just a dog. Jamal's heart stopped. His fingers trembled as he brushed Shadow's head, feeling the life draining from his best friend's body. The gentle rise and fall of his chest. Gone. Shadow was dead. Jamal's vision turned red. Everything inside him screamed to react, to lash out, to fight, to rip these bastards apart. But he knew better. He knew how this played out. A black man standing over his dead dog, fists clenched, surrounded by cops. He knew how this ended. So he stayed frozen. He forced himself to breathe, forced himself to swallow the rage burning through his chest like acid. But his silence didn't matter. One of the officers, still smirking, nudged his partner. He looks pissed, he muttered. The other officer shrugged, his lips curling into a mocking grin. Yeah? What's he gonna do about it? Jamal stared at them, his body shaking with rage, but his voice empty. What was he gonna do about it? They thought they were untouchable, that they could take whatever they wanted and walk away like nothing ever happened. They thought Jamal would stay quiet. But they had no idea. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They thought Jamal would stay quiet. But they had no idea. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Jamal Lewis sat in his small living room, staring at the empty space where Shadow's bed used to be. The house was silent. Too silent. For the past 10 years, Shadow had been more than just a pet. He was family, a constant presence, a loyal companion. The only one who had seen Jamal through his worst days without judgment. But now, that space was empty. And so was Jamal. His mother, Miss Lewis, walked in, her eyes filled with quiet concern. She had raised him to be strong, to endure, to never let the world break him. But even she could see it. This time, something inside him had cracked. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice soft. "Baby, I know it hurts, but we can't fight them." Jamal's jaw tightened. His fingers curled into a fist. "That's the problem, Ma. They know we won't fight back. That's why they keep doing this." His mother sighed, shaking her head. "I've seen too many good men get buried trying to prove a point." Jamal exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. This wasn't just about Shadow. It was about everything. The way cops would slow down when he walked home at night. The way store clerks watched him like he was a thief. The way people clutched their bags tighter when he passed. Being black in America meant being guilty until proven innocent. And now they had taken the one thing in this world that had truly loved him without fear. Jamal stepped outside, his eyes scanning the neighborhood. His block wasn't rich, but it was home. The houses were old but well kept, front yards lined with rusting fences, porches where elders sat and watched the world go by. Kids usually played in the street, but tonight everything was quiet. Too quiet. People were inside, peeking from their windows. They had heard what happened. Not a single person had stepped forward. Not a single person had asked, "Are you okay?" Because they already knew the answer. And they knew that speaking up meant trouble. A few blocks down, a group of men stood outside a corner store talking in hushed voices. Jamal recognized them. Neighbors. Good men who worked long shifts just to make ends meet. But even they wouldn't look him in the eye. Not because they didn't care, because they were scared. Scared of what happened when black men got too loud? Jamal clenched his fists. For years he had played it safe. Kept his head down, moved carefully. Made sure he wasn't a threat. But that hadn't saved Shadow. Nothing would have. Because to them, his life had never mattered in the first place. And suddenly Jamal realized, maybe silence wasn't safety. Maybe silence was just another kind of death. And he wasn't ready to die. Not yet. Not without a fight. Jamal walked into the police station, his heart pounding like a war drum. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, casting a sickly glow over the cheap linoleum floors. A few officers sat at their desks typing reports, laughing at inside jokes, like this was any other day. Like they hadn't just murdered his dog in cold blood. He stepped up to the front desk, his hands clenched into fists. "I want to file a report." The officer behind the desk barely looked up, a bored, overweight man with thinning hair. He took a slow sip of his coffee, then exhaled through his nose. "For what?" Jamal's voice was steel. "For the murder of my dog, shot by one of your officers." That finally got their attention. A few heads turned. Someone chuckled under their breath. The officer smirked. "Oh, you mean that stray?" Jamal's blood boiled. His nails dug into his palm. He wasn't going to lose control. Not here. That's what they wanted. "His name was Shadow," Jamal said, voice tight. "And I want a report filed. Now." The officer sighed dramatically, then tapped a few keys on his keyboard. "You got any evidence, kid?" "You have body cams," Jamal shot back. "Street cameras, witnesses." The officer snorted. "Yeah? And you think that'll help you?" Jamal's stomach twisted. A door creaked open behind the desk, and a tall, burly officer in a black uniform stepped out. Sergeant Daniels. The nameplate on his chest gleamed under the dull light. Daniels didn't smile. He didn't blink. He just stared at Jamal like he was a cockroach that had crawled onto his desk. "You're making a mistake, son." Jamal squared his shoulders. "No, officer. The mistake was killing my dog." Daniels sighed and leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Listen real close, boy." His breath smelled like stale coffee and cigarette smoke. "You don't want to do this." "I do." Daniel's eyes darkened. "If you push this, You might just have a little accident yourself. Jamal felt the room shrink around him. He knew that tone, that casual, calm, I own you tone. The same one he'd heard from teachers, from bosses, from cops who pulled him over for random checks. He swallowed hard. Is that a threat? Daniels chuckled. Nah, just a friendly warning. Now get the hell out of my station. The officer behind the desk smirked. No report today, huh? Guess that means case closed. Laughter. Jamal turned and walked out. But inside, something in him was screaming. That night, the first anonymous message appeared on his phone. Unknown number. Drop it while you still can. Jamal stared at the screen, his pulse pounding. He looked out the window. The street was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. Somewhere, out there in the dark, someone was watching. A few nights later, he spotted a black, unmarked SUV parked down the block. Not moving. No headlights, just waiting. When he left for work, the same car followed him for 3 turns before disappearing. And then the final warning came. It was a Wednesday night. Jamal was in the kitchen reheating leftovers when a sharp thud hit his front door. Guys, his heart stopped. Slowly he approached, gripping the doorknob with sweaty fingers. When he opened the door, there was no one there. Just a crumpled piece of paper lying on the doorstep. Jamal bent down, his hands trembling as he unfolded it. One sentence, back off, and underneath it, drawn in thick black ink, a bullet. Jamal sat in the dimly lit diner, his hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee. The place smelled like burnt toast and old leather, the kind of joint where men with heavy pasts sat alone with their thoughts. Across from him sat Walter Briggs, a former defense lawyer, now retired. His silver hair was neatly combed back, deep lines etched into his dark skin. He stirred his coffee lazily, eyes scanning Jamal like a man measuring the weight of a storm. I heard about your dog, Briggs said, his voice rough with age. And I heard about Daniels. Jamal's jaw clenched. Then you know why I'm here. Briggs exhaled through his nose. Son, I spent 30 years fighting dirty cops. I won some, lost more. He took a sip. You sure you want to do this? Jamal's eyes burned with something beyond anger. I don't have a choice. Briggs studied him for a long moment. Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. All right, here's what we do. Briggs filed an official civil rights violation complaint with the Internal Affairs Division. He knew all the loopholes, the right words to use, the pressure points to push. And against all odds, they took the bait. 2 weeks later, a formal internal investigation was launched against Officer Daniels and his unit. It wasn't much, but it was a crack in their armor. Jamal watched the news that night, his breath catching as the anchor read out the report. An internal review is underway after allegations of excessive force by officers in the 12th Precinct. The department has yet to comment on the claims. It wasn't justice, but it was something. Jamal felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this fight wasn't impossible. A few days later, Jamal received a call from an unknown number. At first he ignored it, but when it rang a second time, something in his gut told him to answer. Jamal Lewis? The voice on the other end was calm, professional. Who's asking? Name's Elijah Carter, investigative journalist. I think we need to talk. Jamal frowned. About what? About Daniels, about your case, about the fact that you're fighting against some of the most dangerous men in this city. Jamal's grip tightened around the phone. And why do you care? A pause. Then, because I've been chasing this story for 2 years, and you might be the key to exposing them. Jamal hesitated. Was this a trap, a setup, or was this exactly what he needed? Meet me in person, Jamal finally said. Somewhere public. Elijah chuckled. Smart man. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Johnson Park. The call ended. Jamal exhaled, his mind racing. He had a lawyer, he had the media's attention, he had a spark of hope. But he also knew one thing for sure. The cops weren't going to let him walk away from this alive. Jamal was driving home from work when he saw the flashing red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. His chest tightened. Not again. He pulled over, gripping the steering wheel as two officers approached his car. One of them, Officer Daniels. Daniels tapped on the window with his flashlight. "Step out of the car, Lewis." Jamal frowned. "What's this about?" Daniels smirked. "Illegal possession of narcotics." Jamal's stomach dropped. "That's bullshit." The second officer leaned into the window. "Then you won't mind if we check your trunk?" Jamal's heart pounded. He hadn't done anything wrong. But he knew how these things worked. They didn't need evidence. They just needed a reason. He took a slow breath and stepped out. The cops pushed him against the car, cuffing his hands behind his back. Daniels walked over to the trunk, popped it open, and whistled. Well, well, what do we have here?" Jamal craned his neck. His blood ran cold. Inside his trunk, 2 bricks of cocaine. "These are planted. A setup." Daniels grinned. "Looks like you're under arrest." Jamal struggled, rage boiling in his chest. "You set me up. I don't even—" A fist slammed into his ribs. He doubled over, gasping for air. Daniels leaned close to his ear. "You thought you were smart? Thought you could take us down?" He chuckled. "Let's see how smart you are in a jail cell." The last thing Jamal heard before they shoved him into the squad car was the sound of Daniels laughing. Jamal sat on the cold concrete floor of his jail cell, his lips split, his ribs aching from the welcome beating the cops had given him. They hadn't stopped there. Every few hours, officers walked by his cell, taunting him, spitting insults. "How's it feel, tough guy? Still think you can beat the system? Dogs die. Black men disappear. That's just the way things work. No lawyer's gonna save you now." Jamal didn't respond. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. But inside, he was drowning. Outside, Briggs and Elijah were working around the clock. The charges were airtight. The drugs were found in his car. The evidence was wiped clean. The body cam footage conveniently missing. The case was designed so Jamal couldn't win. Elijah slammed his laptop shut. "They've covered their tracks. This is bad, Briggs." Briggs exhaled heavily, rubbing his temples. "We need a miracle." And that's exactly what they got. Briggs was at his office when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Briggs." A voice, low, cautious. "I don't have much time." Briggs sat up straight. "Who is this?" "Someone on the inside. I know what they did to Jamal." Briggs narrowed his eyes. "You got proof?" A pause. Then, "I have everything." Briggs gripped the phone. "Meet me, tonight. No cops." The line went dead. Briggs leaned back, heart pounding. If this was real, everything was about to change. Briggs was at his office when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Briggs." A voice, low, cautious. "I don't have much time." Briggs sat up straight. "Who is this?" "Someone on the inside. I know what they did to Jamal." Briggs narrowed his eyes. "You got proof?" A pause. Then, "I have everything." Briggs gripped the phone. "Meet me, tonight. No cops." The line went dead. Briggs leaned back, heart pounding. If this was real, everything was about to change. Jamal sat in the courtroom, his hands clenched into fists. His life had been torn apart, his freedom stolen, all because a group of corrupt cops decided he was an easy target. But today, the truth was coming out. Briggs stood before the judge, his voice steady and commanding. "Your Honor, what you're about to see will prove that my client was framed." He turned to the large screen behind him. A video began to play. Body cam footage. The courtroom fell silent. Daniels and his crew, caught on tape. "We'll plant it in his trunk. Make sure the cameras malfunction like last time." That idiot thought he could file a case against us? This is how you deal with these people. Teach him a lesson. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge's expression hardened. The cops looked pale. Briggs didn't stop there. "And Your Honor, we have a witness." A door opened. Officer Ryan stepped in. Daniel's face twisted in rage. "You son of a—" Ryan ignored him, walking straight to the stand. He took a deep breath, then spoke. "Everything in that video is true. We framed Jamal Lewis. We shot his dog. We threatened his life. We erased evidence. And we did it because we thought we could get away with it." A murmur spread through the courtroom. People were outraged. Jamal felt his breath catch in his throat. Finally, someone was telling the truth. The judge's voice was cold as steel. "So, Officer Ryan, you're confirming that this entire case was a setup?" Ryan nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge turned to Daniels and the other corrupt cops. His eyes burned with fury. "You are the real criminals here." Daniels opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was caught. The judge slammed his gavel. "Effective immediately, you are stripped of your badges. You will be taken into custody and formally charged with obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and misconduct." Daniels lunged forward, furious. "This is bullsh—" Two officers grabbed him, forcing his hands behind his back. The same way they had done to Jamal. For the first time, Jamal saw fear in Daniels' eyes. And it felt damn good. Outside the courtroom, crowds had gathered. They had followed Jamal's story. They had seen the injustice. When he stepped outside, people cheered. "Justice for Jamal. We won't be silent anymore." Briggs patted his shoulder. "You did it, kid." Jamal looked around at the faces in the crowd. They weren't just here for him. They were here because this fight was bigger than just one man. He took a deep breath. He was finally free. But as he walked away, his chest tightened. Shadow should have been here. He closed his eyes, remembering the way his dog used to wag his tail every time he came home. Jamal had won, but some losses could never be replaced. Jamal stood in the park, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. The autumn air was crisp and the golden leaves crunched beneath his shoes. He hadn't been here in years. This was the first place he had ever brought Shadow as a puppy. His first steps, his first run, his first bark of excitement. Now the park felt empty. Jamal exhaled, his breath visible in the cold air. He closed his eyes as if he could still hear Shadow's paws racing through the grass. But there was nothing. Just silence. "Excuse me, mister." Jamal turned. A small boy, no older than 6, stood beside him, clutching a toy dog in his tiny hands. His eyes were round, curious. The boy pointed to Jamal's side. "Where's your dog?" Jamal felt something tighten in his chest. He glanced at the empty space beside him, the space where Shadow should have been. For a second, he couldn't speak. Then, with a faint, sad smile, he knelt down. "He's not coming back, kid." The boy frowned. "Why not?" Jamal swallowed hard. "Because now he's free." The boy thought about that for a moment, then smiled. "Maybe he's running in a big field somewhere." Jamal's throat burned. He forced himself to nod. "Yeah, maybe he is." Later that evening, Jamal found himself outside a small dog shelter. He hadn't planned to be here. His feet had just taken him. Through the glass window, he saw a litter of puppies playing in a pen. Tiny, clumsy, full of life. One of them, a small black pup with wide, eager eyes, stumbled toward the glass and pressed its nose against it. Jamal's heart clenched. For a moment, he saw Shadow. Not as he was in the end, bleeding, lifeless, stolen from him, but as he was in the beginning. Full of joy, full of life, full of love. Jamal took a slow breath. Was this a new beginning? Or just a way to fill the emptiness? The shelter worker smiled at him. "You thinking about adopting?" Jamal's fingers hovered over the door handle. For the first time in a long time, he didn't know the answer. And maybe that was okay.